Now this is the rheumatoid factor or RF quantitative test. And this I like to use to teach serial dilutions as well as pipetting skills. So the first thing we're going to do is label our test tubes. We will need 5 patient test tubes and 2 control. So I label it 1, and it's just me today, 1 gene. And you can do it a couple different ways. A lot of times you can just do, and then 2 through 5, I'll just put my first initial. Usually I put first initial of my last name once I get past the first tube that has my full last name. So I have 1 gene, and then I have 2 through 5 J. Then my 6th tube will be my negative, and I put NEG, and my 7th tube will be my positive, and I put POS. So I set them in the rack, which I'm going to have to turn it to face me. So that's the first thing you do is label your tubes. Then you want to put your pipette to 950 microliters, because, let me see if I can get it to where you can see it. 950 microliters, which is what goes in the first tube of the patient. I'm having a little difficulty here seeing with my good eyes. This one's a little, sensitive. So I'm going to put saline, which you always want to try to do a solution of saline in a test tube and not pipette from the stock solution unless you have to. Like when I use a big pipette, and then I'll just put this as my saline. So I am going to pipette 950 microliters, or 0.95 milliliters, and if you notice I rimmed my tip again in the first tube of the patient. And then my first tube of my only tube of negative and my only tube of positive get 950 or 0.95 mils of saline. Then I'm going to switch my pipette to 500, and if you notice I'm using the blue. Let me get it there and I'll show you when I get it there. Having trouble seeing it, not on top of it. Now, this one's a little touchy. Then I have 500 or 5/10 milliliter, and you notice I'm using the bigger pipette. It goes from 200 microliters to 1,000. So my next 4 patient tubes get 5/10, and once again, smooth and easy when you pipette. Just go to the first stop with your thumb, rim it, and then gently press down to dispense it. So you get your saline in first. Now you're ready to do your controls and to do your patient. So I need my yellow pipette, and I have 950, and I want to make a 1 to 20. So I want to get 50 microliters, or 0.05 milliliters, because 50 plus 950, when I get my left side back to 1, will make a 1 to 20. And then naturally I use a smaller pipette tip, and I take my serum that I removed from either a red top or a gold top, just go to the first stop, rim it as you come out, and put it in your first tube only, and you mix it. And you don't have to use parafilm if it's a low volume. Some people like to mix with just tapping the bottom as well, or they use parafilm. Then you discard that tip and get a new one. And now I'm going to put 50 microliters of my negative control. This one you have to take the nipple off, and sometimes they're tough to get off. You got to use your fingernail to get down to it. And it's 50 microliters, because remember, you run the patient and controls in the same way. And I add 50 microliters to 950 of my negative. Then I want to change pipette tips, and I'm going to add 50 microliters of my positive. Like I said, the nipples are sometimes very hard. They're kind of tight. And then first, just go gently down to the first stop, rim it as you come out, put it in the tube, and then mix it. So if you'll notice, I mixed it after I add something right away. You need to mix them when you're adding a couple reagents together. So these two, we'll leave them sit a minute. I don't serial dilute with successive tubes, but the patient, since they might be more positive than the 1 to 20, I need to serial dilute with 5/10 of a milliliter, because these 4 tubes had 5/10. My first dilution was 1 to 20, but my second through fifth are twofold, or they double the reaction, because I have 5/10 of saline, and I'm now going to take out 5/10 from tube 1. Remember, first stop, very gentle, rim it, add it. Then you mix tube 2, set down tube 1, and now I'm going to take out 5/10, rim it, put it in tube 3, set tube 2 down, mix tube 3. Then I'm going to go into tube 3, rim it, set it down, put it in tube 4. And remember, you've got to mix between, and I didn't have to change pipette tips till the very end. Now on the 5th tube, in this procedure, I do not discard, because if this is positive to tube 4, I need to continue the dilution 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this one I am going to set back to the back of the rack, because I'm not going to incubate that with the others. So all of the volumes in the patient tubes are 0.5, and a good way to check your pipetting is to see if all those match. Now I need to change tips. The only thing I like to do when I do this procedure, but you don't have to, but the agglutination shows better if you take 5/10 out of the negative and the positive control, and then all your test tubes will have 5/10 in them. Okay, so I did it for the negative. It doesn't change the dilution. It's still 1 to 20 on your controls, but the agglutination shows up better if it has the smaller volume in it. And once we've mixed it, the dilution does not change. So the one thing when you do the quantitative that's different from the qualitative is you don't use the latex that has IgG tagged with latex straight. You make a 1 to 3 dilution. You put 200 milliliters of saline. So once again, I'll use my bigger pipette, drop it down to 200 milliliters. Sorry, I have to look at it myself, or else I'm missing it. And then I'm going to take 2/10 of saline and put it in my tube, and then to make it a 1 to 3, I'm going to drop it to 100 and put 1/10 of latex, and that'll make it 1 part plus 2 parts equals 3 parts total volume. That's how you get your 1 to 3. Once again, I have to take the nipple off, and these nipples are tough, because when you do the easy test, you use the dropper. When you do the diluted test, you don't. And this is something I'll have already made in class, because this reagent goes through quickly, and we don't want to waste it. So once we get to this part in class, I'll actually be the one to make it for you. So the next part we have to do is add a drop of latex to each one. And I do not like using big droppers because it wastes the reagent. So if you'll notice, I had a big dropper here, but I find it wastes the reagent, and when you're trying to teach 10 to 13 students, you go through the reagent fast. So I use a little dropper and do 1 drop in each. That one had a little bit less. And what we do next is we shake our rack, and you can put it at 37 degrees either in a heat block or in a water bath that's at 37. So what we would do is heat it for 15 minutes. But I'm just going to act like it's been 15 minutes since, you don't need to sit here and watch it heat. And what we do when the 15 minutes is done, we take the test tubes and spin it in a little centrifuge. And while that's spinning, usually you spin it a minute, I'm going to show you how we read them. Now this won't have sat the full 15 minutes, but it'll still give you the technique of reading them. And what's neat about this technique, once you learn how to look for agglutination in a test tube, it'll transfer to you looking for agglutination in blood bank. So once my tubes have stopped spinning, that you'll find with agglutination methods, different things that you do to them help improve the test results. Heating, centrifuging, some you cool, some you rotate. So what we'll do when you read them, instead of looking for agglutination on a card, you look for agglutination in a test tube. So how I always do it, I take my patient and my control. I take my number 1 patient, just like I do in my card. I hold my controls on either side of it, and I lay the test tubes in the mirror, and I look for agglutination in the mirror, and I try to roll them to get a big surface area, and you look for white clumps. And what I like about it, if the patient has white clumps like the positive control, it's positive. If it's smooth and milky like the negative control, it's negative. But the one thing with the RF test, you have to read all of the tubes, because there's a thing called prozone, and the antibody sometimes is too strong until it gets diluted out. So sometimes you may not get a positive till tube 4. So the RF test, the big thing, read all the tubes, and you report it whatever dilution. So if it's tube 1, it's 1 to 20. If it's tube 2, it's 1 to 40. Tube 3, 1 to 80. Tube 4, 1 to 160. If the 4th tube is positive, you got to take that 5th tube that you set aside and continue it out 6 more tubes. If the patient is negative, you don't call it negative. You call it less than 1 to 20. So each lab procedure varies in how you report it.